The Kansas State Wildcats will need multiple cornerbacks in the transfer portal this year in order to be successful in 2025.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcat podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh. You can find me on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh. And thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, I tried to get this episode to you yesterday morning, but we did have some audio issues. So we're going to pivot a little bit, obviously keep you updated and get the most updated information, but we're still going to lead with the same starting topic because it's a big one. And it's a big reason why the portal has changed in the eyes of Kansas State and why it should at least change in the eyes of Kansas State's recruiting staff and Coach Chris Klieman, because Jacob Parrish, star cornerback, number one cornerback on the team, has declared for the NFL draft. And although that's very exciting for the Wildcats defensive back, it leaves a huge hole in this Kansas State secondary heading into next season, into 2025. And that's going to have to be addressed, and hopefully rather quickly. And it looks like there's already been some moves for that process to start. So we're going to obviously talk about that on today's show. We're going to dig into it deep. But first, let's take a look at the collegiate career of Jacob Parrish, because he's became a fan favorite over the years, and really for good reason. Let's really talk about this last season. According to PFF, Pro Football Focus, he had a fantastic season, especially towards the end of the year. His overall grade was in the high 70s, close to 80. One of his best games came against Cincinnati late in the season with a PFF grade of 78.2. The first game of this season against UT Martin, 81.4, but against the Big 12 conference, he was fantastic, and overall just was a dominant threat in the secondary. And even when he came up and played closer to the line of scrimmage, if you looked at the snaps that he played, he played a lot of snaps, over 400, close to 500 snaps over the season. Actually, that was just on defense. Overall, he plays 682 snaps. Looking at the wrong number there. But yeah, what a fantastic year for him. In 2022, we saw him with a defensive grade of 69. 2023 went up to 69.9. And then in 2024, it went up to 75.1. So in the eyes of Pro Football Focus, and we're not going to get too into numbers on this show, at least in that standpoint, but it's really fun to look at. If you ever checked out Pro Football Focus, they take a lot of tangibles. They take a lot of different stats and they put them all together. And they have a lot of data points on the field. So it's interesting to see, especially since he's declaring for the draft. There's going to be a lot of things that are looked at, just not the stats of how many tackles he had, but seeing the increase in Pro Football Focus's score from him every single year is something to be really excited about, especially his coverage grade. His coverage grade went up in all of those aspects. The only one that really declined from 2022 to 2024 was his tackling, but you can make an argument that that was because he had a lower snap count, almost cut in half in 2022. He still had a great one in 2024, and it was a major increase from what he did in 2023. So you could say that that actually was an improvement from last season, and that's where actually most of the snaps kind of come into play on that portion. That's about as far as I'm going to get into snaps, but overall, he had a great career with Kansas State, and I think that this is someone that you could easily see play on Sundays and be an everyday player on Sunday, represent Kansas State very proud on Sundays, whatever team that happens may be, one of the 32. I'm not really quite sure where he's mocked to go, if it's a late pick or wherever the case may be, but I think whoever does pick this guy up is going to have an impactful player who's not afraid to, give it all he's got and really just play really hard and earn his spot on this squad. Kansas State native. Should be really fun to watch him play on Sunday. So congratulations on a heck of a college career with the Wildcats, and I can't wait to see what you can do on Sundays. Now that we've got that out of the way, we have a huge question to ask. How do we replace a guy like Jacob Parrish, right? Will one cornerback in the transfer portal be enough? And I'm not really sure if that answer can be answered with just one guy. And what I mean by that is not saying that you have to replace Jacob Parrish with multiple players, but the way that this roster is constructing and how it's starting to look and shape because of how the portal has looked or because of how people have graduated, you are missing a heck of a lot of depth when it comes to the cornerback position. So I am going to go again and state that you need more than one cornerback in this transfer portal window. I'm going to say you need two in order to be successful in 2025. If you look at how everything is just panning out right now with the depth chart, multiple players are coming in from the recruiting class, and that's a big hit. Obviously, there were some safeties that it could play both, defensive back on the corner side and safety. So obviously that's a big deal. But right now, Justice James is your number one cornerback. Is that going to be good enough heading into 2025? I think there'll be some big question marks if that's the case. I think that if you have James as your number one cornerback heading into 2025, then you're going to have some problems. So I do think that you have to make sure that you're adding some good depth and possibly a starting corner or even a starting cornerback number two for both sides going into 2025. You have Donovan McIntosh, who could be a good piece as well. JoJo Scott, Martell Jackson, Sirius Stinyard are coming in from the recruiting class. You have Noah King as well, who's one of your highest defensive recruits in a very long time, but there's some rumors that he might actually switch over to the safety position. So he could be out on the corner. So another reason to even add cornerback even more. You have a lot of freshmen, a lot of sophomores in that secondary, and that's a great thing to have with youth, especially if they stick around, don't hit the portal over seasons to come. But can you trust them right away? You don't know what you got from these 26 guys that you just recruited and just added just last week, right? You don't know exactly what you have. Sure, you've seen them in high school. Sure, you've seen them do some great things at that level. But we're talking moving from high school, even if it's some top state championship teams that we have on this recruiting class. We just saw quarterback Dylan Duff win the state championship this past weekend. Congratulations to him. But when it comes to the secondary, how is that going to translate to the high school level, to the Power 4 level, and some of the best football when it comes to Big 12 football? So it'll be really interesting to see. There's going to be a lot of moving parts happening in this transfer portal, and it has to start with cornerbacks. And there's some really fun names to look at. So who can Kansas State go after in this portal to fill the needs in the secondary? That's got to be the biggest question for the next few weeks, honestly, until we get an answer. And who's the best on the board? There's some really nice players on the board, and will they be the exact same players that the Wildcats go after and actually get them on their roster? Will they be the same players, the ones that are the best on the board and the ones that Kansas State's looking after? And do they have a shot at those best players? We're going to check that out and so much more here on Locked On Kansas State. With the Rate Bowl coming up soon, just after Christmas, it's going to be tough when, looking at some plane tickets. It's always going to be, that's a really expensive time for plane tickets, right? But I'm still looking at checking it out and maybe hitting the road down to Arizona to check out the Rate Bowl. And with that being said, if I'm trying to get back maybe some of my money, maybe I should think about checking out Game Time. And the reason I say that is Game Time is one of the nicest ways, one of the easiest ways to get tickets on the, with probably the best prices of tickets. And I've used them multiple times over the past, week, past month, past year. I've used them just lately. I went to a game. I was over in the Seattle area and went to a Seattle Kraken game. And let me tell you what, using Game Time saved me probably $25. And that's before I even used the code that I'm going to tell you today. The personal experience was fantastic. I had the easiest time just using it on my app. And it was all in one pricing. I didn't have to worry about those extra fees like you see with other competitors. And it was just all in one pricing. You toggled the feature. It showed you exactly how much money you're going to spend up front. That was one of my biggest pet peeves. You spend $20 on a ticket, or at least you think you're spending $20 on a ticket, and it winds up being $45, $50 after all those tickets and fees. And you didn't even know where you're sitting. With Game Time, you see your seat views and the lowest price guarantee. You get game time ticket coverage as well. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing agency. So I encourage you to download the Game Time app if you're going to be getting some tickets anytime soon. Create an account, and while you're there, use Locked On College for $20 off for your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. Game time today. What time is it? It's game time. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your Kansas State Wildcats podcast every single day of the week. And thank you for making me your first listen every single day. For your second listen, checked out Locked On Big 12, because we have a team in the Big 12 in the college football playoffs. They have a bye, the Arizona State team, but they're still going to have a lot of things to talk about. Drake Toll will have you covered over there. So check out Locked On Big 12 for your second listen. In the second segment here, we got to talk about some of these options, some of these cornerback options that could be heading over to Kansas State after entering the transfer portal. And from what I've gathered from social media, from message boards, from just seeing names on entering the portal, it looks like there's about 5 targets that Kansas State is going after when it comes to the secondary position, at least at the cornerback position. As of right now, one of them does have a visit scheduled for Kansas State. That's this weekend. And then the rest are just offers or just names that are out there that are possibly connected to Kansas State. Let's talk about one first that has a visit coming up this weekend, and that's Florida International's quarterback Hezekiah Masses. And an interesting player here. Not the best on the board by any means. PFF had him at a grade in the high 60s, but he could really fit this when you're talking about the depth position. He might not be your cornerback one, but talking about needing depth would be a really, really nice piece. Last season, 34 tackles, 51.1% pass completion against him. He had 2 pass breakups. He did have an interception, and that interception was for a touchdown. Again, it was a 62.4, actually a little lower than the high 60s when it came to his PFF grade. He's going to be on a visit this weekend, and hopefully that's a good sign. Hopefully he likes what he sees at Kansas State, at Manhattan, because we need all the help we can get on that one. What I think is the best bet for Kansas State is Northwestern cornerback Theran Johnson. And the reason I say the best bet is because he's one of the best corners on the board right now when it comes to who has entered the transfer portal. And it looks like, based on social media presence of Kansas State staff, that they are all in on him. It looks like they are trying to go all out for this guy and Theran Johnson. Last season, 56 tackles. He had a 58.8% completion against him, and he allowed 472 yards on 40 receptions out of 68 pass completions. He had 8 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, and he had 4 touchdowns on the season. Did play a little bit of special teams. Overall, we saw him with an 87.4 PFF grade. And when you're talking about that, let's put it in perspective. That's almost 10 points higher than Parrish, right? So this is the guy that could come in and step up and be that number 1 corner that you're looking for. Has Power 4 experience, played in the Big Ten this past season at Northwestern. Northwestern is not the Northwestern of old, right? Knows he looks good in purple too. That's something to keep in mind, right? No, just kidding. But regardless, I do think this is a guy that if the staff is going all in for, there's a good reason behind it. And I have dug into his highlights a little bit. Did watch a Northwestern game highlights just to see what I could see from him. Saw a couple of his interceptions, and he looks like a guy that will not be a problem out there in single coverage. You can feel comfortable knowing that he's a guy on an island, and that's nice to know. That's not something you can say about every single player on this roster heading into 2025, or even what we saw last season. And secondary was a concern for Kansas State in 2024. Even Parrish at some points, we were saying, worried about some of his play. Overall, he was fantastic, and what he gave us over the last 3 seasons was great, but there were still some times. With Johnson, I think he could be a real true player, and he's obviously going to have other offers. I'm sure he already has other offers to go somewhere else, but he could really be a huge X factor, a huge impact on this defense. So hopefully the staff keeps pressing him and checking out. 3 other players that look like impactful, that could be impactful or could be targeted for Kansas State. Miami of Ohio cornerbacks Rauh Strader is one. He had 56 tackles last year, 13 pass breakups. This is also in the MAC. PFF gave him a 78.5 rating, so pretty decent. Now, all these ratings, with the exception of the next one I'll give you right here, Ethan O'Connor of Washington State. He's another target, 61.6 rating from PFF. He's the only rating in the PFF scale lower than Hezekiah Masses, the one that is going to be taking that visit this weekend. So if you're only banking on PFF grades, which I know I'm giving them a lot in this episode, I don't take them too seriously, but it's just a nice snapshot of what you have from their type of play, of what they've seen over 2024, because of all the data points they use. And I don't even know how many data points they use. I don't even know if they tell you that on the website, but it's interesting just seeing, how they can grade these players, try to do it on a level playing field. And that's kind of why I like to use that number. Kenny Walker from Oklahoma, another one of those top players like Theran Johnson, could be a good target for Kansas State. Again, he's going to have a lot of offers. A guy that played in the SEC this year for Oklahoma, could continue to stay in the SEC, had only 23 tackles this past season, though. 6 pass breakups, did have an interception. His PFF rating, 83.1. I think that all of these guys could be fantastic if they decided to come to Kansas State. Now, we're not going to get all 5 of them. There's no doubt. Keep that in mind. But 2 of them would be absolutely great. My wish list on this would be Theran Johnson and Kenny Walker. That would be an absolute win for Kansas State if both of those 2 wound up heading over to Manhattan. Those could be your CB1s and CB2s for opening day for game number 1 in Dublin. That wouldn't shock me at all if that was the case that they committed, but I'd be happy with one of those 2, either Johnson or Walker, and hopefully a guy like Hezekiah Masses, who is coming over and is willing to go on a visit early, one of the first visits for all of the transfers heading to Kansas State. Maybe he can commit early, and that would be huge. Again, not a guy that could be your number 1 corner. Hopefully, maybe he could. Maybe I could be wrong, but I could see him committing, maybe a guy like him and Theran Johnson. That'd be a huge win as well. What we can't have is just one guy. And even if it's Theran Johnson, even if it's just Kenny Walker, we can't have just one guy. Because again, I stress it, the depth is just not there. Even with that recruiting class, I don't think you can realistically go into 2025 and have a good feeling about trying to improve from 8-4, trying to improve from what you struggled with on defense last season, because there's still a concern about what's going to happen with the depth of your linebacker. We're going to get into that later this week. What's going to happen with the defensive line? We're going to get into that at some point, either this week or at the beginning of next week. If you struggle with the depth of your corners, a position that you should have a plethora of, then there's a big concern. And then that's when I'm struggling to say that this team can be better than 8-4 next year. That's why this is becoming now the true number 1 priority heading in to 2025. I asked the question in a message board. I believe it was the On3 message board just the other day. I recommend you guys check these out, by the way. 24/7's message board, On3 message board. They're great. And I'm not sponsored by them by any means, of course, but they're just really awesome. And I recommend that community is really cool. So if you're listening to this show, you're probably already in one of those. But if you're not, I encourage you to check it out, because there's a lot of fun Kansas State chatter in there. But I asked the question, where would you say the priorities are? And I answered, I asked the 4 position groups, because I feel like the 4 are really tough. Between corner, offensive line, linebacker, and wide receiver, where do you type those priorities? And that's exactly where my lineup goes in that order. I think cornerback is the number 1 priority for the transfer portal for Kansas State for the rest of the season, of the offseason, until they answer that question. Then they can move on. Then I think you got to go to the offensive line. I think offensive line, because of, again, the depth problem, a lot of seniors that are taking off or either hitting the portal, hoping to get a year of eligibility. Don't know what's going to happen on that. So up in the air on that aspect. So offensive line, the next step. Then I'm going to go linebacker, because you had that question last year about the problems with linebacker. Now, we don't have a great success rate when it comes to picking up linebackers in the transfer portal. We'll dig into that more down the road, but that's something to keep in mind. But that should be a priority as well, because yes, you did add a lot of linebackers in the recruiting class, but how much can you rely on those freshmen? Another thing to keep in mind. And then I rounded up with wide receiver, which is a shock if you've listened to my last couple episodes, because I've talked pretty highly about needing a wide receiver, and especially after losing Trey Spivey. I still think that's the case, but I no longer think that is the number one priority at all. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, because we're going to talk about one of the top receivers in the team and what his status is moving forward, because we still don't know if he's going to enter the transfer portal. And that's talking about Jayce Brown, and especially another player as well, another key offensive player. We're going to dig into that. So finally, as we made it through our first full day and now 2 full days of the official transfer portal, we saw where the roster stands. We're going to discuss any further rumblings as well, and we'll hear that always head into the rest of the week. We're going to talk about the rest of the roster, how many people have entered the portal for Kansas State, and what other tidbits should we talk about as we head into the second half of the week here. We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, get ready to tackle the NFL action and college football action. We got Army-Navy game coming up this weekend. One of the best games, by the way. I love that rivalry. It's one of my favorite rivalries in all of college sports, all of sports in general. But get ready to tackle that action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that $5 bet. FanDuel gives you everything you need to place live bets on NFL, college football, you name it, they have it. And right in the hunch, right in the middle of the game, check out latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. I mean, the worst thing is bouncing back and forth when you're trying to lock in and place those good bets. FanDuel has you covered. So while they have you covered, check it out. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You can get started and get that $150 bonus bets if you win on that $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment count with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL. All right, and welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State podcast. And we're going to wrap up this episode with the recent rumblings of the transfer portal, the portal chatter, if you will, what we've seen over the first 2 days inside for Kansas State. As of right now, heading into Wednesday morning, we are seeing 11 players from Kansas State who have entered the transfer portal. Now, we have seen, we've already talked about some of the biggest ones that we've seen, some of the biggest names, but I'm just going to name all 11 one more time, just to make sure we're all tracking. We started off with Justin Wolf, tight end, senior tight end. He entered the portal. Jordan Dunbar, cornerback, redshirt junior. He entered the portal. Taquan Robertson's looking for an extra year of eligibility at quarterback to hopefully he can play another year. He backed up Avery Johnson this past season. Colorado game legend, right? He entered the transfer portal. I hope to see him get another year and get some action somewhere else. Donovan Reedman, edge, redshirt sophomore, enters the portal. Cameron Salas, linebacker, had some good special teams plays. He's looking to get a little bit more playing time, and he's going to enter the portal. That's a huge hit as we're looking for more linebacker help. Another linebacker, Alec Maranko, he's entering the portal. Daryl Jones, cornerback, redshirt junior, another depth piece. Again, was hoping to have more corners, and he goes ahead and hits the portal. Carver Willis, that was an interesting one. It looked like he was going to stay, and then it just didn't happen. He entered the portal. Obviously, Trey Spivey, we know, is out, and he's hitting it. We just put some reports out that he was going to visit Iowa State. Interesting, right? Hopefully that's not the case. But when you had 2 1,000-yard receivers this past season and hit the conference championship game, that's an interesting place to go to. But maybe we'll see him in Dublin once and for all, but just be in a different uniform. Terry Kirksley, linebacker, another linebacker leaving the portal. Might have to bump up that linebacker, maybe the priority number 2. Maybe have to if we get more leaving the portal. And then the most recent one was Dante Thomas, safety, that hit the portal. So as of right now, we have 11 that entered the transfer portal. I'm going to remind you that We do have to get down to 105 on the roster size by fall camp. Doesn't mean they have to get there anytime soon, right? Can still play spring ball over 105. That's an interesting concept to keep in mind, that 105 isn't in a rush. This will be the only year that you really have to worry about it, because you'll always be at 105 after that, or at least have the mindset of knowing where you need to be. This is going to be the toughest year for that. We don't know too much more about Jayce Brown, wide receiver. Yeah, again, before Farmageddon, he said that he was going to enter the transfer portal. I take that back. There was reports saying that he was going to enter the transfer portal. He never confirmed it. He focused on the game, obviously had a great game. Nothing has happened since then. Looks like he's going to stay as of right now. That's where I'm leaning towards after Trey Spivey leaving. It looks like he knows he's going to be the guy. He has a great relationship with Avery, so hopefully that means he's staying. Still the reports of Dylan Edwards being 50-50. I don't know if that has anything to do with DJ Giddens and him reporting or saying he's going to enter the NFL draft. If he decides to stay, maybe that means Dylan Edwards is on his way out, or maybe if he leaves, he knows he's going to be the number one guy and stays put. I'm not sure if that's the case. We haven't heard anything on DJ Giddens as well, and I don't know if we will until after the bowl game. So I'm sure there's a lot of internal conversations happening between those players. No news is good news when you're in the transfer portal. At least right now it is. And we're going to keep it that way. So as of right now, we don't have any new updates on Jayce Brown or Dylan Edwards. As I mentioned just a few episodes ago, it's absolutely important to keep all eyes on them too, because those two are going to be absolute stars if they stay with Kansas State in 2025. Jayce was great. Dylan was fantastic in his role this past season. It's only going to get bigger. Even if Giddens stays, Dylan Edwards' role is going to be a lot bigger in 2025. But I don't think Giddens staying. I think he is going to go to the NFL. But I think he's going to play the bowl game. I think we'll see what happens. We saw what Connor Beebe did last year. Played in the bowl game. Didn't hurt his stock at all in the NFL draft. I think it actually improved it. I think it helped it. And a guy like DJ Giddens and a strong running back class in the NFL this year, maybe moving from running back 7 to running back 6 could be a big difference from potentially getting on a team that is looking at you being a running back that makes the active roster instead of the practice squad, and maybe getting that bowl game and proving that you can still do it in games that some players don't think matter as much, or just getting that recency bias. One more extra shot could be all the difference. You never know. We're going to be back here with another episode tomorrow, still digging into more transfer portal stuff. We have lots to talk about. We're going to wrap up the week with some previews for basketball. We have a lot to talk about with that too. We haven't even got to basketball on this show yet, but we have plenty to discuss. What's going on with that men's team, right? And they got a surprisingly gauntlet of a scheduled next 4 games that could easily make or break this season and potentially put a coach on a hot seat. We're going to talk about that and so much more here on Locked On Kansas State. But until then, please subscribe, please like the video, and we'll see you next time right here on Locked On Kansas State.